Cool, so we should be recording now. And first of all, if you already filled out the cybersecurity interest form and gave me your credentials for the pen testing environment that you wanted, you should have earlier today received an email that looks something like this. It'll give you the server IP, it'll give you a username and a password, and then it'll give you instructions on how to connect. I'm going to show you briefly how to do that right now. So the way you do that on a Windows computer, click on Start, you type in remote, you can just type in remote, and the first thing that comes up is remote desktop connection. You'll click on that. If you're using a Mac, you can do this as well. However, you need to download an app called the Microsoft Remote Desktop app from the App Store, and then you'll also get a window similar to this one. Then you have to enter the IP that I provided you with. The IP is this IP address that I wrote in the email here, 47.129.126. Click connect or hit enter, and then it'll ask you for username and password. You'll enter the username and password that you provided me with that I should have also sent you in the email here. So I'll just log in as the administrator. If you see this warning message, that's because it doesn't recognize the certificate of the computer you're connecting to. That's fine. You can just say, don't ask me again, and click yes, because we do want to connect to it. And then in a moment here, you should see what looks like a Windows desktop. It's actually part of a Windows server. In the upper left-hand corner, you will not see uTorrent because that's just for me as the administrator, but you will see Oracle VM VirtualBox. If you double-click on that, that will open your entire penetration testing environment. And you will have 3 machines here. I do not have them because I'm using my personal computer for this. But on your accounts, I set up all 3 machines, and you should have exactly what I have. So if you don't want to go through the hassle of setting up all the machines yourself, I think this is a lot easier. You just enter your login credentials, and then you have access to all the machines here, so you can follow along with what I am doing with the types of scans that I'm doing here. To disconnect, you click the X right here. It says close, and you click OK. Now going back to the presentation, I'm going to be starting on slide 73. So today we're going to be talking about information gathering. There are 2 types of information gathering. There's passive information gathering and there's active information gathering. Now the difference between passive and active is that in passive, you are not directly sending packets to the website that you're scanning. So to the server that you're scanning, or computer, I guess. So I should say it this way. In active, you are actually sending data to the computer that you want to scan, and you are receiving data back from it. That's active. Active because you're interacting with the remote computer. In passive, you're not actually interacting with the remote computer. You're using other means by which to obtain information about it. So first and most important in passive information gathering, whenever you're going to target a company, is Google. You want to learn the most about whoever you're targeting, and you can do Google search. You can use Google searches to do that. There are some keyword things you can use in Google that a lot of people don't know about, and this might not seem like, you might be like, what the heck, really? This using Google for scanning? Well, yes, actually, you can learn a lot from it. So if you want to scan a specific domain, like for example, let's say we're targeting IIT for some reason. Also, I should have mentioned really quickly that most of the passive information gathering, that is not illegal by any means. Like you can go on Google and you can do any sort of search you want. That's not going to get you in trouble. The active information gathering, depending on what you're doing, it may or may not be. You may or may not need the consent of the people that you're trying to target. So keep that in mind. Not all of these can be done legally, but these can all be done legally. So going on Google, first of all, if I just wanted to search, let's say, stuff that is on IIT's domain, I can type in site, put in a colon, and then the domain that I want to search. So in this case, iit.edu. I search that, and notice that all the results I get all have .iit.edu. Similarly, I can search subdomains here. Subdomains are like, if you have something before the iit.edu, like here we have www, but you might have something else like Vandercook, for example, vandercook.iit.edu. I can also do that. And now I'll only get stuff for that, which happens to just be one page. Now, some interesting, if you wanted to search for a specific file, like let's say you know that PHP is notoriously vulnerable, so you want to see if there are any PHP files, you can go file type : and PHP. And now you'll get all of the web pages that end in PHP. And if I actually were to open any of these, you'd notice that the URL would end in PHP. You can find interesting stuff that way. Let's say I want to look at PDFs, do the same thing. Now I got all the PDFs that are on IIT's website. Similarly to that, you can do in URL or in title, in URL searches for whether something is in the actual URL itself. And in title searches, whether searches for things that are in the actual title of the web page. Of course, you have, a lot of people know about this, but if you want to make something a mandatory, but when you type something into Google like this, like let's say you type in a keyboard, sorry, let's say you type in a keyword. I don't know what I want to type in. I just saw the word manager, so let's do manager. It makes it optional. Like if you want to make it mandatory, you can put these double quotes around it. That makes it mandatory. You can also search strings of words that way. So I'm probably not going to find anything for this, but I could do like system manager. And then, oh, I did actually. So that searches for the entire string that I typed in there. You can do interesting things like that. So along with that, there's something called the Google Hacking Database that is community driven. And here I just typed in Google Hacking Database and it was the first thing that came up. Here's the URL for it if you want to have that. It's exploit-db.com, Google Hacking Database. Now, the neat thing about this is people just played around with the things I told you, and they found a lot of neat stuff. Like, for example, you can see all these different categories, like files containing passwords. If you search this stuff, pages containing login portals. So it's pretty neat, the stuff you can find doing this. And if you wanted to try some of these against, let's say, a company that you're targeting, I can just copy and paste this into Google, and we'll see that I already get a lot of passwords here, apparently. And I can also, of course, add site and do iit.edu if I'm targeting IIT. I don't know. Of course, I didn't find anything here. But yeah, so that's what you have in terms of Google. There's also a site called Netcraft. If you go to sitereport.netcraft.com, I'm kind of showing you the website targeting vectors for now, like the website scans that you can do. Later on, I'll show you how to actually scan the computer itself. But let's say your company has a website and you're trying to target the website. Here are the things you can do. If I go here to sitereport.netcraft.com, I can just look up whatever I want to look up, like iit.edu, hit look up. And then it gives you all the information about the domain iit.edu, the name server that is hosting it, basically a lot of neat information that might help you in your information gathering, the IP addresses that are associated with it, that are hosting the website. So yeah, that's just a quick overview of, that's most of the passive information gathering that you need to know. Another thing that's useful, if we go into Kelly, and I'm going to quickly mention that, let me close this because I don't need it anymore. I'm going to quickly mention that once you actually open, I showed you, whoops. Let's try this. Once you actually open VirtualBox, these are the machines you'll see when you open it, if you set it up correctly or if I set it up for you. I think I mentioned this last time, just as another note. I don't think I included this in the PowerPoint, but If Metasploitable doesn't boot, you have to go into settings, you have to go into system processor and just check this box and it should boot just fine. To actually start one of these machines, you would click on the machine, you would click start. This just says show right now because it's already running. That's how you start a machine, and it should start up and you should get the login page that you saw earlier that I just logged in. The default credentials for each of these machines are provided for you in the PowerPoint. It is on slide 65. So for example, for Kali Linux, the default username is Kali, the default password is Kali. I highly recommend you change that because usually your Kali machine is the one that's exposed to the internet, and we don't want people getting into your Kali machine just because you've left the default credentials for it. And how to change passwords is here. Basically type PASSWD, and then you can change the password for the current user, or if you're changing the password for a different user, it's PASSWD, and then you type in the username. And that's all done through the terminal. So if I open up Kali Linux and I click here, here's the terminal, I get a window like this, and then that's how I interact with the terminal for Kali Linux. The terminal is an input-output system, meaning I can type in commands, it'll spit back out information at me. And most of the actual scanning and the hacking that you'll end up doing will look like this. Also, if there are questions at any time, feel free to message them in the chat. I probably should have mentioned that earlier, and I'll try to address them when I can get to it. So, quick note, if I wanted to look up get similar information about, like, let's say I have a domain that I'm specifically targeting, like iit.edu. I can look up what are the who registered this domain. First of all, I can get an address, I can get contact information, stuff like that, and all the different name servers that are using it just by typing whois. That's called a whois lookup. That you just type in whois, and then you type in the name of the domain that you want to look up. So in this case, I typed in whois and then iit.edu. Note that, so the way DNS, or the domain name service, works is, I'll get to your question in a second, is that when you connect to a website, before you actually get the website information, so to connect to a website, you enter a URL, right? You don't actually enter a weird IP address. You don't enter a bunch of numbers. You enter like google.com, for example. Now, what DNS does is that google.com is sent to a DNS name server. That's what it's called. It's a type of server. Then from there, it has a list of records of actual IP addresses associated with google.com. Now, those, once you get the IP address, it sends it back to you. Then you will connect directly through the IP. So name servers are basically the servers that when you type in iit.edu, it'll connect to one of these three, and it'll give you back the IP of the actual machine that you should connect to get the website information. So that's what that is. Hopefully I explained that all right. Oh, that's annoying. Yeah. So is there anything special about the Windows 10 ISO? Not really. I just found it. I literally looked up Windows 10 VirtualBox machine, and I found a OVA file, I believe, that allows you to really quickly import it, and so you don't have to set it up yourself. But if you have to set it up yourself, you can. I have done that before, actually. You would just download the ISO for Windows 10, and you'd have to go through the entire grueling installation process. But that should work just as well. There's nothing special about the Windows installation I have. It's just a regular Windows. So hopefully that answers your question. But I highly recommend, if you look up Windows virtual machine packages, probably something like that. And then that's the first link I found. You can find pre-made packages for a lot of the most used virtualization software, like the one for VirtualBox is right here. You can also get one for VMware if you're using VMware. So I recommend that. But if you can't do that, yes, you can download a Windows ISO and it'll still be fine. Just more annoying setup for you. The next useful thing that you can do in terms of scanning websites here is an NS lookup. So to do that, that's called name server lookup. Or that's what it stands for. So you type in NS lookup type equals any, and then the domain. If I click enter on that, I can see all of the domains that are associated with it.edu, or all the machine domain names, I suppose that's what you would call them. So I noticed that this is the actual DNS server IP address. So this is for it.edu. So when I actually connect to it.edu, it'll go here first to give me what machine it should connect to. And then from there, here are all of the domains associated with it. Like for example, for doing email stuff, they use these. Not too important. I'll talk about I'll talk more about what you can actually do with these when we get into the exploitation section of the seminar series. Right now, I'm just showing you all the random things you can enumerate, and you're probably going to be like, "This is the less fun seminar," because you'll just be seeing a lot of text, and you'll be like, "Well, what the heck can I do with this?" But that's where the next class in the series will come in. And if you didn't see the first one, highly recommend you view it. I know there's a link to the video. I forget exactly what it is. If somebody could message that in the chat, that'd be great. Otherwise, I'll figure it out later. Now, I guess I won't talk about that. Let's see what I should talk about next. Going into, so that's kind of it for the passive information gathering. I'm just curious if the harvester is on here by default or not, because that's another thing. Wow, all right. Okay, it is on here apparently. So another thing that you can do is if you're looking for website subdomains, there's a useful tool called the harvester. So a subdomain is, if I have it.edu, for example, I think I highlighted this point earlier, but if I have it.edu, for example, and I want to find other domains within it.edu, like usually they'd start with something else .it.edu, like vandercook.it.edu would be considered a subdomain of it.edu. A good way of searching for those is using the harvester. The harvester is just a built-in script in Kali that searches Google or Bing or any search engine that you specify, and it'll search it for subdomains. So for example, if I do -d, then I specify the website, so it.edu, or I should say the main domain name. And then if I do -b and specify the search engine, so I'll do Google. And then I can also put that to an output file if I want to. But I'm not going to. I'm just going to show you what shows up on the screen here. So if I actually do that, apparently it found no subdomains. Wait, no, I think it's still going. Yeah, so it takes a little bit to do the search, but it'll give you some subdomains, so that's kind of useful. It did find some subdomains here, like login.it.edu, and it gave you the associated IP addresses, which is kind of useful. So that's a fun little tool you can do there. Let's see. Yeah, I think that'll be it for passive information gathering. Now let's go on to active information gathering, which is actually targeting the machines that you will be attempting to break into. So we have two machines to play around with, two test machines. We have Metasploitable and we have Windows. So if you want to figure out for your own testing purposes, when you actually go into a new environment and want to break into it, you'd usually start with a ping scan to see what sort of machines are on the network. I think I showed this in the last presentation actually, but that's nmap-sn. Nmap is I'm going to talk more about it later, but Nmap is a very useful tool for doing scans really quickly, and different types of scans as well. So SN is how you would do the ping scan. And I'm just gonna ping scan the network. So I know the network that I'm on if I get my IP address. Let me get another terminal open. By typing IPA, that's how you get your IP address or IP information. You can see your IP address here. So this is the network I'm on. Notice that it's in purple, which is really nice. They actually replaced, it used to be ifconfig that you typed in, and that wasn't as pretty as this one. They replaced it with this one, which is prettier, which I think is kind of nice. You can also type in IP address, like the full word address, or IP ADDR. All those do the same thing. And you'll notice that the network I'm on is 10.0.2.1. Or I should say, the current machine that I'm using has IP 10.0.2.4. So by convention, the full network is 10.0.2.1. Or I should say the gateway to the network is 10.0.2.1. So I can do that and say /24 to scan a range. That'll scan the range 1 to 255. So it'll be 10.0.2.1, 10.0.2.2, etc., all the way to .255 at the end. And that'll tell me what machines are up. That might actually take a bit because actually didn't take that long. Cool. So that scanned all the machines on the network. So that's how I would go about if I were doing an actual attack and I knew nothing about the network. That's how I would start. I'd start by seeing what machines are on there. However, because we're doing this for practice, we know what machines are on here, so we can figure out what machines we want to target. Let's say we want to target our Metasploitable, for example. The default credentials, once you open this machine, are MSFadmin, and password is also MSFadmin. Once again, that's all in the PowerPoint. And you'll notice that the IP address, if I type in ifconfig, because this is an older machine, so it doesn't have IP address, you'll notice that if you look under inet ADDR, it says the actual IP of the machine 10.0.2.5. And you'll notice that during our scan, we discovered it here. On a Windows machine, the way you do that is you open the terminal once you logged in, you click here, you can type in CMD and press enter, and that'll open a terminal. You can go ipconfig is the command for Windows. That does the same thing. And then you can actually see your current IPv4 address right here. So that's the unique IP address for this machine. I talked about that in the last presentation, so I'm not going to go over what that is again. Also, yes, the last seminar's video has now been posted in the chat. So if you ever want to watch that, you can go there and watch it. All right, so once we know what machines are on our network and what machines we want to target, so this is our Metasploitable machine. Once again, this is our Windows machine. So these two are going to be the ones that we're targeting. This is my current machine, and then this is just the default gateway. By my current machine, I mean that's the Kali Linux machine. That's my attacker machine. So really quickly, what we can do is we can start scanning for the ports on a specific machine that we want to target, or scanning the ports on a specific machine we want to target. So let's say we wanted to target our Metasploitable. Well, first we have to figure out what services are running on the machine. And by services, I mean what services that are connected to the internet or to the network that we can try to break into are running on that machine. Because if a service is not connected to the network or it's local to the machine, well, then there's not much we can do to get access to the machine remotely, right? So the way we do that is, well, we can use, first I'd like to introduce a tool called Netcat. Netcat is a very useful tool for a lot of things. It's present in any Linux distribution, pretty much. It's not present in Windows by default, but you can download a version for it in Windows. And basically the command is nc for Netcat. And it is used for connections to other machines, so any sort of connection. So for example, if I wanted to connect to if I wanted to connect to my Metasploitable machine, I know it has a web server, so I'll use that as an example. So I do nc-nv. You can read about what all these flags do, but don't bother. You just have to memorize kind of what this looks like, and that's all you really need to know. nv 10.0.2.5, because that's my Metasploitable machine, And I know, and then I specify the port I want to connect on, which in this case is 80 because that's the HTTP port. If I do that, you'll notice it says this, it gives me this banner, which tells me I'm connected to the machine, to Metasploitable on port 80. And if I type in anything, any bogus information, it'll spit back the actual website code for the default page. Similarly to what a web browser would do, when you actually use a web browser, it does all this, but it puts in actual commands, not the one that I just put in that made no sense. But it'll do that all behind the scenes, and then it'll make this pretty and show it to you in a web browser. But on the back end, this is what it looks like. So that's what Netcat is used for. It's used for connecting to other machines and also opening connections to your machine. So if I wanted to open a connection to my own machine, I'd do -nvlp, and then I'd specify the port that I want to open the connection on. And then I might need sudo privileges for that. Sudo basically means the root user as opposed to the current user, because when you log in, you're actually, your user is Kali as opposed to the root. But to do certain actions require escalated privileges, require root privileges. So you can just type in sudo before the command to run it with root privileges. And you'll notice that now we're listening for connections on port 80. And if somebody connects to me on port 80, then I'll be able to communicate with them back and forth. Actually, I might be able to demonstrate that. Let's see. Let's see if this has Netcat. It should. Yes, it does. Quick note, if you want to see all the options or all the flags, they're called, you have for any command, you would type in the base name of the command and then -h or --help, and that'll show you all the options. And it'll list on the left-hand side, it'll show you the actual flag that you would use. And by flag, I mean the dash and then the letter. And then on the right-hand side, what that modifies. So, but if I try to connect to 10.0.2.5, I should have actually called this seminar information gathering and networking, because you really need to know networking to do information gathering. And then I try to connect on port 80. Now we can talk to each other. And you'll notice that the DF that I just typed in over there showed up here. And I can type something back. I don't know. So yeah, so that's how a communication works on the lowest level, just sending text from one machine to another. Anyway, back to Netcat. The useful thing we can do with that is we can scan to see if certain ports are open on a machine. So let's say I want to scan my Metasploitable machine. I can do nc-nv, and then we'll do -z. Now the -z tells it to not actually connect to it on that port, but just to scan it on that port and see if that port's open. So I believe it does a connect scan, which means it kind of connects to it, but then it doesn't give you a session. It just moves on to the next one. So it sends a connection request to in this case, the Metasploitable machine. The Metasploitable machine replies, hey, I got your request. And yes, I do have a port open. And then it says, okay, I got your response. Or this says back to the Metasploitable machine, yes, I got your response. So that's what that does. I'll enter the IP address for the Metasploitable machine. And then I can enter whatever ports I want to scan and see if they're open. So I'm just going to do I know port 80 is open. So I'll just do maybe, let's say 70 to 90, just so that you can see that it shows that port 80 is open. And you'll notice that it says port 80 HTTP is open, but none of the other ones from 70 to 90 are open. They're all closed. Closed means no service is currently running on them that is connected to the network. So you can't actually access the computer from those other ports, but you can access it from port 80. Yay. Another thing you can do with that scan is you can add the -w flag if you want to. That's the maximum timeout before it moves on to the next port. So I can change the amount of time it waits for a response from the remote computer to see if the port's open before moving on to the next one. And I believe that's I don't remember exactly what that is in. I think it's milliseconds. Pretty sure. Not entirely sure. I can actually tell you. -W. Oh, it's in seconds. Timeout for connects and final net reads. All right. Yeah, it's in seconds. Cool. So yeah, that's one thing you can do. If you want to scan UDP ports, by the way, this by default scans TCP ports. For UDP ports, you have to specify -U. I'm just going to scan for 161, which we'll talk about what that service is in a second. It's called SNMP. But we'll see if that's open. However, that runs on UDP as opposed to TCP, so we have to specify -U if we want to scan it for UDP. Of course, it's actually closed, so that's why it says connection refused. So that's Netcat. However, a more useful way of scanning the Netcat is to use Nmap. Now, because Nmap is a scanning tool that has this scan and a bunch of other useful ones built in, and you notice that I used Nmap for my ping scan. I should talk about what is a ping scan. Before I talk about Nmap, let's talk about what a ping scan is just in general. A ping scan is a scan that basically checks if another computer if you can reach them on a network. So the way you would do that without Netcat or anything is you just type in ping, and then you can type in the computer that you wanted to see if it's on the network. And then it'll keep sending packets or sending what's called ICMP data and trying to receive a response. And if it receives a response, it'll print it here. If you type in some bogus IP address that doesn't exist, then it won't be able to receive any data and it'll just hang. It'll say unreachable. And to stop this at any point, you can do Control-C. That's a standard thing in Linux, in case you didn't know. If you ever run a command and it just keeps running and you want to stop it, you hold down Control and hit C, and then that'll stop it. So that's a ping scan. You could, if you wanted to, you could write a bash script to perform this scan on all of the IP addresses in a certain range. So you would just change the last number and you'd create a for loop and it goes through each of them and tries pinging each of them. You can ping each one once. I don't entirely remember what it is. I think it's -C for count for the amount of times you try to ping it. Yeah, cool. So you'll notice that this time it only did it once. It didn't keep going over and over here, and I didn't have to stop it. So you could do that. However, Nmap just makes the process a lot easier for you with nmap-sn, and that performs ping scans, and you can specify a range. And that'll just automatically ping all those machines for you. The other thing you can do is if some hosts block ping scans, and I don't entirely remember how this works, but there's a different type of scan that you can do in case the host blocks ping scans. Because, like, for example, on Windows, by default, on Windows Server, I should say, by default, they don't allow ICMP packets to be received or sent. So, which means you can't actually perform a ping scan and see if it's on the network. But this is a way around it. I forget exactly what the scan is, but you can read about it. It's --PN. Then you do it the same way. You type in the IP address, and then you can see if it's on the network. Also gave me some useful information about what ports are open on there. So yeah, that's another thing you can do. Now, probably the most useful Nmap commands are when you first start, when you're targeting a specific computer. Like, let's say I know I want to target my metasploitable machine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do nmap-sc and -sv, and then the IP address of my metasploitable machine. Now, I forget which one's which. I believe SC actually scans for services running on the ports, sorry. And then the other one uses built-in Nmap scripts, which we'll talk about Nmap scripts a little bit, to try certain things against those services running on those open ports and see if it can obtain more information. Like, usually it'll grab the banner. Once again, I showed you kind of what a banner was when I connected via HTTP to the Metasploitable machine. But you can usually learn a lot of information about those services. So if I run that command, I do -sc-sv, and then I put the IP address. That's going to take a while to run, so I'm actually going to stop it there with Control-C. However, I already ran it earlier, and I put the output to an output file. So that's how I did that. But basically, now I have a file here called nmap-scan.txt. So if I cat is the command you use to actually read the contents of a file, you'll notice that here was the output of that scan. So not only did it give us the top, I believe it scans the top 1,000 ports that are open, but it will also give us information about it, some basic information about like the service that's running on there, the version. Yeah, so you can see all the things that are running on here. You can specify with nmap, you can specify a range of ports. So let's say I wanted to go to 1 to 65535, I think is the last one. So that's how you scan all the ports. If you want to do a UDP scan, I'll talk about that in a second. So this just does TCP scans by default. And we talked about this also in the last presentation, transmission control protocol versus user datagram protocol. So this will do all the TCP related scans. However, if you want to do a UDP scan, it's -SU. You can scan that way. While I'm at it, I'll also highlight another thing that you can do called a SYN stealth scan. Stealth is kind of a misnomer. It used to be stealthy back in the day, but it no longer is. However, when you actually connect to a computer or any kind of machine, you send a request to the machine saying, hey, are you open on this port? Then it'll respond to you saying, yes, I am open on this port. And then you would respond to it one more time saying, okay, I got your response. So that's known as a connect scan. So when you reach out to machine, hey, are you open? It says, yes, I am. And then you say, okay, got it. However, a SYN scan doesn't send back the last, okay, got it, because it doesn't matter if the other machine knows that you got its message. You don't really care as long as you know whether the machine's open. So when you're scanning ports, it's a little bit faster not to send back that last request. So that's why you would use the SYN scan. If you did at -ST, that would be a regular connect scan, I'm pretty sure. Whereas if you do -SS, that's just, it doesn't send back the last, yes, I got your message, but it doesn't matter because you already know whether the port's open or not. So let's say I want to scan, once again, I'm going to scan port 161. I should specify that that's port with -P 161. And then the machine that I want to scan. And for this, I apparently need root privileges. So I'm going to add sudo to the beginning. And you'll notice that it is closed. And it scanned both TCP and UDP, but the -SU tells it to also scan UDP in addition to TCP. Another thing that you can do is you can specify exactly which ones you want to scan for TCP and which ones you want to scan for UDP by going U:, and then the ports you want to scan for UDP, comma, T:, the ones you want to scan for TCP. So for example, if I just wanted to scan UDP, I put the U:, and that only scans UDP, but it's closed anyway, so it doesn't matter. Another useful thing you can do with nmap is operating system identification. So if I did -O, that'll attempt to identify the operating system based on the other information that it got in the scan. And I think I also did this in the last presentation. So if I want to see what kind of operating system, Metasploitable is running, I can do that. It's not going to be perfect because it just takes whatever information it can get from these services it finds from a basic scan, and then attempts to predict the operating system based on what services are running on it. So not always accurate 100% of the time. However, this is accurate. It is a Linux 2.6.x machine. And I can prove that to you by going to Metasploitable and typing uname-a. And you'll notice that it's Linux 2.6.24. So there's your evidence. Now let's see. If you want to, I know I'm just throwing a lot of really boring information at you, but that's kind of what this seminar here is going to be. I'm just showing you all the how to collect all the information you can possibly collect. And then from there, you decide what sort of information you want to collect. And later on, I'll show you how to actually use that information to get into a computer. So I apologize if this seminar is kind of boring. Another thing you can do is you can specify the ports by going like this. So let's say when I do a scan by default, like for example, when I did this OS scan here, it checks the top 1,000 ports. That means the most popular 1,000 ports on each machine. It has like a list built into Nmap that says which ports are most popular in order. So it'd probably be like HTTP is one of the most popular. So it'll go down the list and just scan the top 1,000 ones. If you want to scan a different range, like let's say you don't need as in-depth a scan, you just want to get it over with faster, because some of these scans take a pretty long time. Like the first one where I showed you this one here, where I just outputted the file as opposed to doing the full scan. It took a while. I don't remember exactly how long it took, but it took a bit. So if you want to maybe have a faster scan, you can just specify the top 50 ports, or you can change the number here, and that'll choose a different number of ports. So that's the first thing. If you want to actually monitor how many packets are being sent during your scan, so these scans, notice I'm doing these scans against the machines that I set up, because I don't want to do these against machines that are on the internet, because I'm sending, these are active scans. I'm sending packets to machines on the internet, and they're sending packets back to me. So that's why I'm doing it with my machines here. If I want to actually monitor how long a scan took, I can use IP tables. To do that, it would be IP tables -I input -1. I'm not going to go through the whole process. It's all in my Kali Linux cheat sheet, which I probably should have mentioned earlier. If you go to the PowerPoint presentation, I should have linked it somewhere here. Let's see, probably at the beginning. Perhaps I did not. Well, anyway, I created a Kali Linux cheat sheet that makes it easier to remember all these commands, because there's a ridiculous number of commands and really hard to remember all of them. So I'm really quickly going to send you a link to that in the chat so that you have it if you ever want to look at it. And all the stuff that I'm doing today is under the information gathering heading. You'll find that on the left side. So copy and paste. Now you have that, so feel free to check it out. Next thing we're going to do. All right, so let's really quickly talk about the types of services that are most important and that you probably should know what they are. So the first one, FTP, is File Transfer Protocol. That's used for sharing files between different machines. The vulnerabilities that are often known to go with File Transfer Protocol are: one, anonymous login. Sometimes if somebody doesn't have a server properly configured, you might be able to log into here anonymously, meaning you don't enter a username or password, and get access to some sensitive files. Another thing is if you're using an old FTP version, there might be some vulnerabilities associated with that. SMTP is Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. That's what you would use for, I believe it's sending emails, not receiving. I believe POP3 and IMAP are for receiving. But the nice thing that you can do with this is sometimes a misconfigured server will allow you to use the verify command if you connect via SMTP. I'll show you how to do that in a second, to verify the users on a machine, or to verify whether a user is actually on a machine. So you can like go through a word list of users and attempt to verify them and it'll tell you if they're verified or not. So that way you can figure out what kind of users are on the machine. So that's one thing you could do with SMTP. DNS, I think I talked about this a little bit, domain name service. That's what routes domain names like google.com to actual IP addresses. So when you're connecting to a website, you go through a domain name server. That generally runs on port 53. Some things you can do with that is you can do, shoot, I'm forgetting the name of it. DNS zone transfer. So sometimes when they set up multiple DNS servers, one server will be requesting the other for information on what subdomains are associated with a specific domain, and things like that. So if you, as the attacker, if you can attempt to do a DNS zone transfer yourself, which means you pretend that you're one of the servers that's requesting that sort of information, and then you can get all of the subdomains and of a website without having to use the harvester that I just showed you or any sort of Google searching methods. HTTP, port 80, so that's for websites. I will probably dedicate an entire seminar just for website vulnerabilities because that's a huge thing. HTTPS is the same thing as HTTP except it's secure, uses SSL encryption. SNMP is Simple Network Management Protocol. Now that's used for, that's present in a lot of Windows machines typically, and it's used for network management, obviously. There's specifically for that one, there's something called the SNMP Management Information Base, and that's a tree that contains a lot of information about the network and network management. So the useful thing about that is you can, if it's not properly configured, you can attempt to enumerate like what services are running on the machine and stuff like that just by connecting through SNMP, and that's port 161. SMB is server message block. That's for sharing, I believe it's for sharing mostly files between computers. Wait, let me check really quick. Yeah, providing shared access to files, printers, and serial ports on network, according to Wikipedia. So sometimes you can find disks, SMB disks that are accessible to everyone or accessible anonymously, and you can find interesting files there. I just put SQL as a separate thing. This is not that important. There are some SQL known vulnerabilities, but I'll talk more about those when we actually get into the website hacking, because that usually has to do with website stuff. That's when you mostly use SQL. RDP is remote desktop protocol. I'm not talking about vulnerabilities necessarily associated with this, but that's what we're using to do remote desktop or to get a nice desktop to another machine, which is what I showed you earlier today when we did remote desktop. We're actually using RDP on port 3389. The terminal version of that is SSH. That is on port 22, and that will just give you a terminal that looks like this where you can interact by providing input and receiving output. So now that we know those, we can talk about how to attempt to gain information using those. So let's start with DNS, or domain name service. So for example, if I type in host, I can see similar information to when I did the NS lookup. The NS lookup actually gave a little bit more information, but I can see, for example, the IP associated with IIT.edu, and I can see some of the mail servers that are handling IIT's mail. So that's kind of useful. I can also do the reverse. So if I have, for example, this IP address, I can see the domain that's associated with it. And then you'll notice that that goes to IIT.edu. So that's just how you do basic lookups there. You can get the name servers for it. You can get the mail servers for it the way you get the name servers. The name servers are the actual servers that do the exchanging of domain name to IP address. So if you provide it with a domain name, it'll give you an IP address and vice versa. That's all handled by the name servers. So ns it.edu, and I can get all the name servers for it. Similarly to the ns lookup. I can get the mail servers by doing mx. Cool. And I can also attempt a zone transfer, which I'm not actually going to do. But the way I would do that is do host-l it.edu. And then, which is the actual host name of the site that I'm targeting. And then I choose one of the domain name servers and attempt to do a transfer from that name server. So the command would look like this. I'm not actually going to attempt a zone transfer against IIT's name server. It probably wouldn't work anyway. That's how you would do that. Another thing that you can do that's kind of useful, that there are a bunch of built-in scripts in Kali that'll do a lot of this stuff for you without you having to do it manually. One of them is DNS Recon. Another one is DNS Enum. There's dig for only doing zone transfers. So another way of doing a zone transfer is I could go dig. But DNS Enum is a useful one because it gives you a lot of information about it. So, and it prints it in a really pretty easy to understand way, and it gives you all the DNS records associated with it. So that's kind of useful, or all the DNS records it can find. So that's another tool at your disposal. In terms of finding website subdomains, another tool you can use is Sublister. I showed you the Harvester. There's also Sublister. There are a lot of tools for doing all these things. It kind of depends what your preference is. So if I did, I'm not actually going to demonstrate this one, but if I go apt install Sublister -y, that's how I would install it. And then from there, I could use it by doing Sublister -d and then the host name. So basically, people keep creating different scripts and different commands to do these sorts of things, and you can choose which ones you want to use, which ones work for you. So in terms of actual scanning of websites, so we know that from our base scan, from our nmap scan, if I look at it again, cat nmap scan, we notice that Metasploitable has HTTP running on port 80, meaning it has a web server running. Now, if we actually want to scan the web server, there are two of the most popular programs to attempt to find pages or actual web pages on the site, especially ones that are hidden from the internet. Those tools are Derb and Dirbuster. So what they do is they go through a target word list of pages and subpages, and they'll attempt to connect to them. And if they can connect to them, they'll say, yes, the page exists. And if they can't connect to them, then you know the page doesn't exist or isn't accessible. So for example, if I want to use Derb, go HTTP, because that's the protocol we're using, ://10.0.2.5, because that's a Metasploitable machine. And it's going to use its default word list. You can also specify a different word list. I'm going to stop it because this is probably going to take a bit. I can also specify my own word list by putting my path to the word list after here. So, for example, if I want to use the Rocky word list, which I wouldn't because that's a word list containing passwords, but if I want to do that, I'd specify that there. And notice that we did find some sub pages for 10.0.2.5. So we found a docs page, error, export. We found all these sub pages, and we can actually access them. If I open up Firefox, I'll be able to access each of these pages by typing in the URL. Another tool for using that is called Dirbuster. And that's a nice graphical one. So if I just type in dirbuster, it'll open a graphical user interface like this. I'll type in my target URL, which you just follow this format, // 10.0.2.5, because that's the metasploitable machine I'm targeting. And then on port 80. And then you can specify, there are a lot of things you can change. This is actually multi-threaded, so it will concurrently try a bunch of different types of scans. And you can change the number of threads. The more number of threads, the faster the scan will be. However, the more it might hang your machine because the more resources it takes up. So 10 threads, I'm gonna leave it at that for now. I can browse for a specific word list here. I actually don't remember, there's some built-in, let's see if I can find them. There's some built-in word lists specifically for website scanning. I think it's in user share word lists. There you go. Derb has its own built-in word lists, and Dirbuster has its own built-in word lists. So like, for example, you can try to find some directories on the machine, and you can use this small word list of directories, and it'll basically do a dictionary attack where it goes through each of the directories in this list and attempts to connect to it. If it can connect to it, it knows it exists. If it can't, it can't. And then once you do that, you can also specify all these different options. I'm not really going to go into them. You click start, and it's going to be scanning, and it'll show you what it finds. And you'll also be able to see what it finds here in the terminal. So if you're like me and you really like the terminal and you don't need something that pretty that's so complex with all the options, you can also use GoBuster. GoBuster is the terminal version of Dirbuster. You actually, I don't know if it is built in Kali. No, it's not. So you actually have to download it off GitHub, but it's really useful. You do the same thing as you would in Dirbuster. The base command is like this. Then you also type in the same URL, 10.0.2.5. And then you would type the directory, the path to the word list, and you can use the Dirbuster word list. So I can use the same word list I was using before. If I can remember where it is. And then directory list small, something like that. So that's how you do that. That's how you can scan for it. This is really useful. So when you're trying to break in through a web page, a lot of the times administrators will not really take good care of the website, and they'll leave a lot of important pages up on the internet, not necessarily directly accessible from Google, but if you try to do attacks like these, or scans like these, I should say, you'll find a lot of interesting pages that you can go to and check out. And sometimes you might find passwords leaked there, or sometimes you might find login pages that you're not supposed to have access to. So that's what that's for. Let's see, what is next? So I don't know if I highlighted NetDiscover yet, but I guess I'll do that. So another way of doing a quick ping scan or a network discovery scan similar to Nmap, I already showed you two ways of doing it. I showed you Netcat, the old school, or not the old school, but the hardcore way. The Nmap, that's another way of doing it. And then another easy way of doing it is using NetDiscover. So if I look at my IP address, because I need to know what range I'm scanning, 10.0.2, I'm going to scan .1/24. I talked about that earlier. That's going to scan the whole network range. I can go NetDiscover. I also need to know the interface that I'm using, the network interface. So in this case, you'll notice that this is associated with network interface F1. Now, the way I set up the machines, if you did your own pen testing environment or whether I set it up for you, you're probably going to see F0, which is your NAT connection to the internet. And you're going to see F1, which is your connection to the other machines in the network. So F1, and then we go -R and 10.0.2.1/24. Oh, apparently I thought NetDiscover came. Did I spell it wrong? No, it did not. Huh. I guess it doesn't come built in Kali Linux. I guess you have to download it from GitHub. I didn't even remember that. I apologize for that. Sorry, but yes, that's another tool you can use to do a similar sort of scan. Another scan that's useful is to get the net BIOS info called NBT scan. Now, the net BIOS info will basically give you, if you can do an NBT scan on the machine, it'll give you some basic information about it. So if I perform it on Metasploitable, of course I need sudo privileges for that. You'll notice I got the IP address, I got the net BIOS name. So that's the name of the actual machine. The user name on the machine, I got a user on it. And we have the MAC address of the machine. The MAC address is the unique identifier of the machine. Every hardware has a built-in MAC address. Of course, this one it's virtualized, meaning I'm running it as a virtual machine, so it doesn't actually have its own MAC address, but that would show up here. That's one scan you can use. Let's see, what else should I highlight? Oh yes, SMB enumeration. And you can, this video will be recorded, so if you ever get tired of watching me do all these and you have a specific one that you have questions on, you can always watch this later and you'll see me and fast forward to the specific one that you want to look at. So for SMB enumeration, there are a number of tools for doing this. SMB, once again, I talked about is server message block. And server message block is good for file sharing and stuff. And there's a built-in tool in Kali that I'd like to showcase called SMB map. And you use that like this, 10.0.2.5 -r. And then that will perform a basic scan of all the disks that are running there. Notice we have some that give us read-write access. So then later on, and I'll show you how to do this in a later class or a later seminar, you can actually access these disks and see if you can find anything interesting on them or any interesting files. So that's how you would use SMB map. There's also enum for Linux. You can do it directly through RPC client. RPC client is how you would interface with SMB if you're not using a built-in script like SMB map. So next, for SMTP enumeration, which I talked about earlier, simple mail transfer protocol, if I wanted to verify if a user is on the remote machine, I'm going to directly connect through Netcat. So 10.0.2.5, and it's on port 25. And now if I we'll see if it supports verify. I don't even know if it does. I didn't test this. But if I verify, let's say root, I don't know, then you'll notice it does support verify. So it tells me, spit back this message that root does exist. If I try to verify a user that doesn't exist, then it'll say recipient address rejected. So that's a nice way of just, if you have a word list of potential users that could be on the machine, if you want to go through that word list and see if they actually are on that machine, that's something you can do. To do that, I would write a bash script to go through all the users. The way you would do that where I'm not going to get too much into bash scripting, but I'll just show you how you can do that. For user in cat user list.txt, or whatever you name your user list, you can call it whatever. Let's say you had a user list called user list.txt. You're going to echo that verify and then $user. So what this does is it'll go through each line in user list.txt, because cat will print out user list.txt. Then for user in this, that'll go line by line, get the user and store it in a variable called user that you can use. And so here I'm putting user, so I'm putting verify and then the actual username. Then I would pipe that into, so a pipe takes the output of this command and makes it the input of the other command. So If I pipe it into 10.0.2.5 on port 25, which is how I connected to SMTP, and then let's say I grepped. Now grep once again allows me to, not once again, but it allows me to isolate only the lines that contain certain information. So in this case, if I get a 252 response, or we know that that is good, versus if I get a 550, we know that that is bad. So I can just grep for 252, and then done to end the loop. If I use this loop and I had a word list called userList.txt, I could go through all the users and try them one at a time. You could also write a Python script for doing this. Or this might be, I'm not sure if this is built into Kali or if this is something you have to download on GitHub, but there's also SMTP user enum that'll make this fast for you. Yeah, so it's not actually built into Kali. There's a GitHub page that you can go and download something like that. Or you can write your own Python script. All in my Kali Linux cheat sheet that I sent in the chat, it's all there. So you have all these different methods listed there. So when it comes to SNMP, SNMP, once again, simple network management protocol. It allows administrators for managing their computer from the network. However, if it's misconfigured, you can learn a lot of information about the machine that you're targeting. So I don't think either of the practice machines that we have here, Metasploitable or Windows, have SNMP running. However, I can kind of tell you what you could do if they did have it running. So SNMP, so to actually connect via SNMP, you have to have a, I don't know what I want to call it, but you have to have a keyword for connecting. So the, or I guess you have to specify what community you'd like to connect as. So the three most common ones are public, private, and manager. So really quickly, what you can do to figure out which ones are supported by the machine that you want to connect to is you can echo them all to a list. Sorry, I don't know why I typed that. Echo. So we're going to echo public. We're going to echo private. And we're going to echo, third one is manager, because these are the main three. And then we're going to add, if you, let's say you wanted to just scan one IP, then you'd echo that IP into a separate file called IPs. And I'm using echo just to add information to this file. Like I'm adding public, private, and manager to this file. However, I could also like edit the file through Nano, through some editor, and then edit it that way. But I'm just doing this for convenience. So let me just demonstrate that. If I go Nano community, you'll notice that everything I just echoed is here in separate lines. And then I use what's called 161. It's a tool that I believe this one is built into Kali. I specify the community file, and I specify the IP file. And then it's going to attempt to connect to the IPs that I specified using these three keywords or these three community words. And because SNMP is not running on the machine that I attempted, which is Metasploitable machine, and of course got nothing. But if it did get something, it would tell you that this one worked. From there, once you know which one works, you can use a tool called SNMP walk to enumerate all sorts of information about the services that are running on the remote machine that you're targeting. So if I use SNMP walk, here I'd specify the one that worked. So let's say public worked as a keyword, then I'd specify public. And then I can specify the version if I know the version. If I don't know the version, I don't have to specify the version. And then the IP address, 10.0.2.5, which in this case won't work because, once again, Metasploit does not have SNMP running. For a machine that did, if I did this, it would print out the entire tree, the entire MIB tree, or management information base tree, that gives me the system processes, the running programs, things like that. If I wanted a specific subsection of that tree, I'd have to know the unique identifier to get that subsection. And once again, those are all listed in my Kelly Links cheat sheet. So let's say I wanted to just get the system processes. It's 1.3.6.1.2.5.1.6.0. And now it'll only print out this part of the tree. If I execute this command, it'll only print out this part of the tree, and that part of the tree just lists the system processes running on the remote computer. So if you're doing an Nmap scan, for example, and trying to discover the services running on the computer, it will only get you the services that are open on the network. However, doing something like this will tell you all of the services that are running on the computer, and it will be much quicker than an Nmap scan, because an Nmap scan, having to scan every single port, would take a long time. But for this one, this is the computer telling you what services are currently running on it, so you can get that information almost instantaneously. There's also a tool for doing this if you don't want to use SNMP walk. There's an alternative called SNMP check. And then you type in the IP address. And then that'll kind of do pretty much what I did above. It'll attempt to use public. Once again, if you find another community keyword that works, like private or manager, then you can do -C and then change the keyword. And then notice now it's trying community private. So yes, I think that about covers everything I wanted to cover in terms of scans. I apologize that today wasn't too fun, but there's definitely at some point I'll show you how to use the information that you obtained from all these scans to learn more about services to attempt to break into a computer. And I'm definitely going to have a separate seminar just on website attack vectors, because there are a lot of ways to get in through websites, and like SQL injections and file inclusion vulnerabilities and that sort of thing. Two quick things I should have mentioned. There's also a nice tool. So I showcased Metasploit last time. Metasploit is it's a community-based collection of scripts that you can use to attempt to break into other computers or run scans on other computers. It has its own scans too, so that's worth checking out. But I'm not really going to go into that too much. I usually don't use it for scanning. I usually use it for exploitation. I will get into it more when I talk about exploitation. Another tool you can use is called recon-ng. It's kind of like the Metasploit, but specifically for scans. So this might even be a better tool to use than Metasploit, but it works kind of like Metasploit. So if I refresh the marketplace with marketplace refresh, by the way, I started running this, I should have mentioned, I started running recon-ng by typing in recon-ng to the terminal, and that gave me this. So then in the marketplace, I can search for a specific module. If I type in search, I can see all the different modules I have. So all of these are different scanning modules that you can use. For example, I can perform a who is an organization. I can use virus total, which checks for which virus total is a site that's primarily used for checking whether a certain file is vulnerable. But yeah, you can use a lot of these. Read about them on the internet, figure out what they do. There's none in particular that I want to showcase because I honestly don't use these that much. But then if you wanted to actually use one, you go modules, load, and then the module name. So like this one, for example, I could load that one. And then I could do info to get more info about the module. If I type in info, Of course, it's not going to give it to me now because I didn't actually select a module. Then I can set an option similar to how in Metasploit you set an option with set, then the name of the option, and then the value you want to set it to. So info will show you your options. If you want to set an option, you would go options, set, and then you would put the option, and then whatever the value of that is. So yeah, and then to actually run it, you type in run, click enter. So it's kind of like Metasploit, but it's Metasploit specifically for scanning. I know I'm not going that in depth into it, but that's also because I don't know a lot about it and I've never really used it. So it is something worth checking out. Notice you can do that netcraft lookup that I showed you earlier by going to netcraft.com. You can do that through here. So that's worth looking into. One more thing I should talk about is Nmap has a lot of built-in scripts that you can use. So Nmap, once again, was our big scanning utility. And most of these scripts are for looking for actual specific vulnerabilities that are really popular and really well known. But all the scripts for Nmap are stored in /user/share/nmap/scripts. If I go here, here are all the Nmap scripts that I can use within Nmap. And there are a lot of especially HTTP, like website related scripts that I can use. And there's a crazy lot of them. So it's not like I can tell you, oh, here are the best ones to go to. No, you just, like here's an SMB brute force script. We talked about server message block earlier. You can attempt to brute force that. So there are a lot of scripts. Now to actually use a script, what you would do is you would go, you would do a regular nmap command, but then you do --script equals, and then the path to the script you want to use. So for example, if I wanted to use, let's see, SMB brute, why not? Copy. Then I can paste that. And I meant to type more, and then I type in the IP address of what I want to scan, and then it'll run that script against that target. And sometimes they fail, like for example, this probably doesn't have SMB running, so that's why it failed. But if it did have SMB running, then I'd be able to execute that script against that service and hopefully gain more information about it. So that's the last thing I kind of wanted to go over. Now let me quickly talk about, so I know I've been throwing a lot of information at you right now, and you're probably like, well, where do I start? What do I do with all this? Which one do I do and when? So now very quickly, before I end, I want to talk about the process that is usually used when you're attempting to break into a computer or a website. So social engineering is kind of its own thing. I'm probably going to do a separate presentation on that one. That'll be a fun one because social engineering is really flashy and everybody loves it. But for that, the way I'd start is I'd go on Google and try to learn as much about the company and the people who are involved in the company, assuming I'm targeting a company, as possible. Try to find people's friends. There's also a nice tool that I'll talk about. I didn't talk about it here, even though it kind of goes into information gathering, or it is information gathering, but specifically for social engineering. It's called Maltego. It's built into Kali. If you type in Maltego, and I'm going to showcase that when I do a seminar on social engineering. So not right now. But basically, that allows you to search social media sites really quickly, search websites really quickly to see if you can find information about people or information about a company. So there's that. That's where I would start if I were doing a social engineering attack. I'd start by Googling information about a company, learning about the users, learning about their friends, and then I do some Maltego searches. Now, if I were just asked to, if somebody hired me, for example, to penetration test a network and see if I can find vulnerabilities on any of the machines or break in, I'd first start with a ping scan, like what I showed you with Nmap, or any of the other tools that I showed you. But I like to use Nmap's SN scan to see what computers are on the network. From there, I'd use Nmap-sc-sv. I might even go, to save myself some time, top ports equals, I just do the top 50 ports. And then I choose a target that I want to look more into. Or I could do a range of targets too. I forgot to tell you that in Nmap you can do a range of targets for any command, not just for the ping scan. So I can target all the computers here. Generally, what I would do is I'd do the ping scan first, and I'd see what computers are actually on the network. Then I'd create a file of computers that are on the network, and then I'd use a bash script. I'm not going to go into actually how to do this, but I could use a bash script similar to the for loop that I showed you above. I would probably use that to go through each of only those targets that I know are running on the network. There actually might be an option in Nmap to do that. I don't know it off the top of my head, so I apologize for that. I mean, there might be an option to read host names or IP addresses from a file. I'm pretty sure that exists. That's something I'd have to look into though. Then from there, once I know the services running on the machine, I would literally go on Google and I'd look up that service name and see if there are any vulnerabilities. And if I find one on exploitdb.com, which is the most popular exploit, it's the most popular community-driven exploit database where you can find a bunch of exploits. Then let's say I look up BSF TPD because I saw that was running on Metasploitable. If I search that, I should find only exploits related to that. And if I click on it, I can learn more about it. I can read about it. Because it's community driven, people can generally post on here whatever they care to post. So sometimes they'll give you some code that you can look at and you have to figure out what it does and see if you can run it. Also note that the nice thing about the exploit database is they have people who go in and try to verify the exploits to see if they're genuine or if somebody's just messing with you. Because it's community driven, some people like to just try to mess with you and put things on there that don't work or that wreck your computer. So if it has a check mark, that means they verified it. That means it does actually work. So then from here, you'd look at this. You'd figure out, oh, this is C code. I'm going to have to compile it on my machine. I'm going to have to run it on my machine. That's all part of the exploitation process. And so that's what I would do. I would look for vulnerabilities on exploit database based on what the results you got from your Nmap scan. You could also, in addition to that, what I would do is I would attempt if I know specific services that are running, like for example, if I know SMB is running, I can try an Nmap script like SMB-security-mode, which looks for SMB vulnerabilities. I can try an anonymous FTP login if I know FTP is running. There's an Nmap script for that as well called FTP-ANON or FTP-anon. The ones I'm naming right now are in the actual Nmap scripts folder that I showed you earlier. You can find them there. If you know, for example, an Apache version that has a vulnerability associated with it, and you notice when you did your scan that the HTTP Apache version that was running has that vulnerability, then you can attempt to exploit that vulnerability. Using an Nmap script, there are some HTTP Nmap scripts, as you saw before, or you can use Metasploit. That's all part of the exploitation section that we'll talk about at a later date. Then, if you find nothing there, nothing that allows you to get in the machine from there, then I look and see if it has a website, and see if you can attempt to break into it using some of the website things that we did. So if you remember, we used Derb, we used Dirbuster to find the subpages on a website. And I would attempt to find as many subpages as you can. You'd visit them in Mozilla Firefox. You'd see if they look interesting, like if they have a login page, or if they give you any info that they're not supposed to give you, and try to get in from there using some sort of a website attack vector. And of course, the more information, this is where you spend a large portion of your time. So people glorify hacking and they're like, oh, this is this really cool thing that only you have to be super smart to do and whatnot. No, it's really just memorizing a lot of these commands and having the patience to go through all these really annoying scans and sitting through them, typing them into the terminal, seeing what kind of information you get. That's 75% of it. And the more information you can enumerate during the information gathering process, that's why this is probably going to be one of the longest seminars, just because this is where you spend the largest portion of your time in information gathering. But once you, the more information you enumerate, the more information you have to work with. So if you know all the users that are on the machine, you can try SSH brute force as each of the different users. SSH, once again, is the terminal interaction with a remote computer. You could try brute forcing the login info, which I kind of talked about in the last seminar. That's where you enter their username and then you try a word list of passwords and see if one works. I'm just saying this as an example to say that the more you enumerate, or the more information you get about the services running on the computer, the users on the computer, the information about the services running on the computer, the more vectors you have for actually breaking into that computer. And attack vectors basically means ways that you can potentially get into the computer. So I'm sorry this presentation was kind of boring. I know I went over a lot and threw a lot of tools at you. Hopefully it kind of made sense. If you have any questions, message them in the chat and I'll answer them. I'm going to stop recording in a second, but that pretty much concludes this presentation. Once again, if you haven't filled out the cybersecurity interest form, I know I keep emphasizing this, but if you want your own pen testing environment, I set it up for you. So just fill this out and I'll get you one. Otherwise, thank you for coming. Thank you for staying. I know this was long, and this video will be up later, so you'll always be able to rewatch it if you ever forget anything. And that's it. Have a good day. I'll stay on for another 5 minutes in case you have questions.